Hello and welcome to Church Estate with Stephen Kokx. This is a show dedicated to all things Catholicism, all things politics, and everything in between. Well, it seems like it's been years since the Francis reign of terror came to a close, but perhaps it feels that way because the insults hurled by the Vatican towards Catholics who breed like rabbits and priests who say the Latin Mass and wear lace vestments have certainly died down since the conclave. But you'd have to be a grifter chasing clicks and money, or just fame, to be silent about the fact that the errors of Vatican II and the corruption of Catholic doctrine, which again is what we're fighting for, have continued under Leo XIV, aka Robert Prevost. While many of the loudest voices for sanity over the past 12 years have suddenly transitioned into cowardly lapdogs of the synodal church, seemingly in exchange for the smells and bells of the Latin Mass, one person who has continued to sound the alarm on the obvious gaslighting taking place is my guest today, Liz Yore. Liz is a longtime ally in this fight who I first met around 10 years ago, as we both have roots in Chicago. We both went to Loyola. Liz, in case you don't know by now, is an international child protection attorney specializing in the investigation of missing, abducted, and exploited children. She served as Oprah Winfrey's special counsel and was general counsel for the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. Now, she regularly appears on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast and has written for various news outlets, including Breitbart, Town Hall, Daily Caller, and my former employer, LifeSite News. I want to welcome Liz to today's program. Thanks for being here, Liz.
Thanks, Stephen, and delighted to be with you, and congratulations on this new venture. I'm thrilled to have your strong, bold voice fighting the good fight. We need young people like yourself really taking on the forces of evil, unfortunately, that are gripping the culture and our church.
I'm very humbled by that and flattered. And, we're just following the footsteps that have been tread before us. Obviously, we need to continue the fight really for the next generation because the church is still infiltrated, right? No matter what color Leo's vestments are, we know the facts of the facts, and the church is infiltrated. So where am I right or wrong here in saying in the monologue that Trad Inc. is basically sold its soul, trying to appease this new regime, play nice, we won't bark too loud, in exchange for favorable treatment? It seems that's what's happening so far.
It really does. And frankly, I was shocked that this position was taken by them. To me, it seems like there's a little bit of post-traumatic stress from Bergoglio. They want the fight to be over. We can't dictate when the fight ends. Only our Lord can. And so it seems to me that they don't have the stomach for the battle. And this, in my mind, with a smoother, kinder, gentler, but nevertheless, Francis 2.0 Pope, we need to double down. We need to respond quickly and to watch the signs. I mean, after 12 years of Bergoglio, it seems to me, Stephen, that it's quite obvious what's going on here. I mean, Leo came out on the loggia and started talking about the synodal church and continuing the agenda of Francis. We'll take him at his word. I mean, we're all trying to, people who have now embraced him have all tried to believe, he doesn't really mean what he says he says. So to me, it's quite obvious what's going on.
Now, Liz, I think you're just being negative. You're blackpilling here. You're being not optimistic. What do you say to those folks who are saying, "Hey, come on, give him a chance. Let's give him time." This reminds me sort of the 2013 narrative when Bergoglio got in there and said, "Oh, it's a translation issue. Right. Don't hyperventilate. Take a breath."
Well, look, I'm a lifelong Chicago Catholic. I was weaned on tough, ruthless Chicago Democratic machine politics. And I think I have a unique and sobering perspective on the first American Pope from Chicago. And for decades, I really witnessed the collaboration between the deep church and the deep state to promote a radical anti-Catholic agenda, starting off, frankly, in the Catholic Church in Chicago. I've personally battled the Archdiocese of Chicago on hundreds of clergy abuse cases, which were covered up. And unfortunately, I know where all the bodies are buried. And at this point in my life, and in doing nothing but really tracking what what Francis was doing. I met Francis. I think I've told this story many times. In November 2013, I went to a human trafficking conference in the Vatican, met Francis, and felt like I was in the midst of communist China.
Wow.
It was radical Marxists from the UN who were invited as guests to speak. And
Yeah.
I didn't hear much about human trafficking, but I heard quite a bit about climate change and its connection with human trafficking. Well,
Yeah.
as a child's right advocate, there's nothing further from the truth.
Yeah.
So, we know Leo was pretty much, I think honestly, he was plucked from relative obscurity from a small Peruvian diocese. And once that happened, my spider sense were activated, and Leo was sent to the Vatican as the head of the dicastery. And from a Chicago politics perspective, that is the patronage office, and it's a powerful office. And what I also saw was that he was mentored by Supich, and very quickly he became cardinal. And so I was very concerned that this orchestrated rapid rise of Robert Prevost was planned. There was a planning stage for him to replace Francis. And I kept on watching, and I'm sorry to say that I think I was right. Hat tip to Supich, who I believed, really was in charge of this succession plan. They pulled it off largely quietly, seamlessly. And now what they've done is the goal was, Stephen, you and I know that the loudest voices against Francis and his agenda came from the American church,
Yes.
the American traditional church. And the goal for the next pope was to silence those voices as best they could. And so what do? They pick an American pope. You can, and even coming from Chicago, my eyes aren't blinded by that.
Yeah.
Secondly, a kinder, a gentler, a mild-mannered man to replace Bergoglio. Well, Bergoglio, frankly, was a lunatic. And now after he died, we find out he had the papers to prove it. So I think we have to be adult about this, discerning about this, mature about this. If we don't know now what is going on in the church has been infiltrated by Marxists, by Freemasons, by the homosexual agenda. And it's the modernists would never give up the power that they had with Francis.
Well, like you said, the American Catholic strads were the most critical of Francis, and I think, like you said, there seems to me to have been some sort of conclave deal. Who else has the power and influence to tell pretty much everybody to just draw down your swords and to say, okay, give this guy a chance? And I think let's spend some more time on Prevost here. I want to bring up real quick his past. There's this was actually in Chicago. So again, where you're from, and I lived in Chicago for several years, and I went to Loyola, and the Chicago Theological Union there, where Prevost went in the 70s, is known for its radicalism. But more recently, when Prevost was bishop down in Peru, several women have come forward saying he covered up abuse allegations made against us. And more recently, this is another situation that's developing that I'm going to keep an eye on, especially, is that a Peruvian ex-priest responds to Kokx coverage. And this priest is saying basically that he tried to help those women that Prevost essentially ignored. So, what is your general take on this? It seems that either this was, as you said, Prevost was known and picked perhaps because of these blackmail allegations, or they're just being negligent in regards to who the next pope is. This is all very astonishing.
Well, we know they don't vet the pope. Obviously, they wouldn't have allowed somebody like Bergoglio to become pope with his baggage that he brought to the papacy. Or, on the other hand, maybe that was just fine with them. But in the waning days of Bergoglio, we were all demanding that whoever steps in to replace him should be fully vetted. should not have a history of cover-up abuse or abuse of underage victims. And, I think we're going to see, Stephen, more of these cases coming out of Peru. And this is very troubling because it's, to me, this is, and it really is, people need to pay attention to this because, if you read these articles, it seems to me that according to these victims, how Prevost handled them was to say, I'm very sorry, yes, but there's nothing I can do.
Right.
And to just sweep it under the rug and not help these victims. This is a Vatican that is in a free fall over clergy sex abuse cases, over the 12 years of a protection racket by the Pope of predators. And there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done to purify and clean up the church. So these allegations coming within the first 6 weeks of his papacy, coming from, poor women in Peru, and I thought the response from the Vatican was weak. And I think it's just very troubling that it's more of the same. And I don't, this to me is like, why are we giving him, the benefit of the doubt? Why are we giving him this opportunity, this honeymoon period?
Yep.
These are serious issues for the church. And if the church ever hopes to get any credibility with the culture as a whole or with Catholics who have left the church, it's got to address these problems. And we had Bergoglio, who just laughed him off, scoffed him off, and as we know with McCarrick, elevated and promoted pedophiles in the Vatican. So, it's just that they don't get it. And it's, in my mind, when this starts to surface very early on, it's game on, folks. We're back in the battle. If we're going to purify Christ's church, we've got to take on these very uncomfortable battles. We've got to investigate, and we've got to demand that if there was a cover-up, and this is 2025, Stephen. I mean, there's been 25 years of this. If the church and the hierarchy doesn't appreciate that the lay people are not going to permit this, then, we have got to demand that he goes. He's, if he covered up clergy sex abuse cases down in Peru, it's a disqualifier. Right. And that's what the other thing is, it was a very quick election, very quick. And that to me is also troubling because there wasn't a thoughtful inquiry into these issues. And nowadays, it's not like, 1920 or 1910. All they have to do is Google these prelates who were in the running. But they didn't even do that. And so, I'm so fed up because, in the other stories that we're going to talk about, there is this recurring theme of, and we know it was Bella Dodd who started it in 1929. And it wasn't just Bella Dodd in America. There were Bella Dodds all over the world at the behest of the Communist Party, putting in communists and homosexuals into the Catholic Church to destroy it from within. And so here we are in 2025 dealing with this issue. And so to me, the urgency is even more so, especially, and there's no excuses now after Bergoglio. I mean, he just laid the groundwork. He did it with a hammer, but are we so foolish to be persuaded by somebody with a manners and a mozzetta that we're not going to look beyond the surface? Is that what the Catholic tradition? We're not going to look past the surface. Yeah. We're not going to look at what he's done, what he's saying. So anyway.
One way they are trying to change the subject is with, again, as you mentioned, the manners and the mozzetta. And this just took place recently at the Jubilee for Youth event in Rome. And here we see Catholic Saturday Twitter account showing Leo singing in Latin. Of course, this is a big thing, apparently. It's a return to so-called tradition. Other influencers are also promoting this as a very positive thing. But Catholic Esquire, who we've had on this program before, mentioned this in a tweet, which I think is very, very important to recall here. And here's Taylor Marshall singing the praises of Leo, talking about Latin and whatnot. Here's what Catholic Esquire's take is. None of this matters, matters if the people adoring the Eucharist and actions do not believe in what the Church teaches, the doctrines and dogmas, in other words. And so he says Marshall ignores all that. I think this is what's happening. Everyone is focusing on, the nice vestments and papering over the doctrinal stuff, which is, again, as you mentioned, very, very troubling.
Well, and the youth are flooding to the Latin Mass and staying at the Latin Mass, and that is the liturgy that he is crushing left and right. And if he really had a concern about the youth and the future of the Church, which is in the Latin Mass, he would have picked up the phone and called Bishop Martin of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Bishop Weisenberger of Detroit, and said, please reinstate those Latin Masses, yes, because they're thriving. Young people are attending them. But no, we're supposed to be overwhelmed and so impressed with a Woodstock situation, and with, what, 1 million people, they say, 1 million young people,
yeah,
when the true faith is fostered and thriving in the Latin Mass, which he is crushing. I mean, the last 6 weeks is just like every week there's another, massive suppression of the Latin Mass in America. Again, no excuse. He knows darn well what's going on in his home country.
Well, even in Detroit here, right? I'm in Michigan. You're not too far from Michigan. Weisenberger over there cracked down on three professors who aren't even really conservatives. Ralph Martin was leading the charismatic movement in the 70s and 80s, and so as you said, Leo could just pick up a phone. He speaks English from America. Hey, what's going on? I don't like that. Let's restore tradition. Right? He's not doing that.
No.
Okay, so why is everybody criticizing the ordinary of Charlotte, criticizing Weisenberger in Detroit, but not mentioning the fact that Leo's the guy in charge and the buck stops with him?
Absolutely, the buck stops with him, and to me, this was an opportunity to really show his true colors, and what we have seen is more of the same. Francis 2.0, and frankly, it seems to me more draconian with respect to the Latin Mass and with respect to these highly respected men, theologians who have given their life to the Church, who are not, radicals, but are thoughtful, educated, deliberate, brilliant men who have really fostered vocations by their wisdom and knowledge, and just their heads are lopped off by the bishop in Detroit, Weisenberger. So, it's just, to me, it's just every week there's more and more, Stephen, that's coming forth that if you're going to brag that we have an American Pope, then it seems to me that the American Pope better pay attention to the good things that are happening in the Church that are being suppressed by his bishops. But the opposite is happening, and they're on a rampage, quite frankly. And so, it's very disturbing, and I'm not going to, and because he smiles and wears a White Sox jersey and a Chicago Bears jersey and a Villanova baseball hat, that doesn't impress me. What impresses me is his care for in protection of the dogma and the magisterium of the Church, which frankly is all he's supposed to do. That is his main job as Pope.
if we're getting caught up in the aesthetics and the freedom of the Latin Mass, which it can be a good thing, I think, in some ways, but the doctrine and the dogma is the issue here, right? And I want to stay on this topic for one last quick take here, because I saw this headline, Cardinal Koch over there in the dicastery for so-called Christian unity. Of course, he doesn't promote that at all. He's just promoting syncretism. He recently said in an interview that it is desirable that Leo change course and become more pro-Latin Mass than his predecessor, Bergoglio. But I think what's really curious about this is not the fact that he said this. I think it's more of just a trial balloon to see what's going to happen and engage reaction. Because what I already saw in response to this, I'll bring it up in just one second here. If I can find out, here we go. Archbishop Vigano, again, a hero of yours and mine, I know,
Yes.
was tweeting about an article that Chris Jackson wrote, again, who's a friend to Cox News. He was talking about Cardinal Koch's words about the Latin Mass, and Archbishop Vigano said, read this article by Jackson, and he says this. Conservatives are allowed to celebrate the ancient rite only because they appear to be more attentive to formal ceremonial aspects than to substantive doctrinal ones, to the point of having no problem participating in the Novus Ordo. And up here he says they are granted a semblance of legitimacy provided they do not question Vatican II and the new ecclesiology. So that to me strikes at the very heart of what you and I are talking about here. And that Vigano is hitting a nerve, and that's the real crux of the matter.
It is. And, I have to say, Stephen, that I can only thank Bergoglio for forcing me to revisit Vatican II, to revisit what was happening in China in the 1950s in the Catholic Church in China, to understand and research to the nth degree the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, and to really understand the climate change hoax, and to do a deep dive on the deep church and deep state and the globalist agenda. But for all of that, and of course, when you start investigating what happened in Vatican II, you realize that, again, it was a Freemason, Bugnini, who was responsible and lied, manipulated the liturgical changes in the church during Vatican II, and we just and I remember that time, Stephen. I remember
You lived through it.
it was overnight. The
Yeah.
changes were, people were scratching their heads. Where's our communion rail? What are these guitar players doing on the altar? What are the felt banners? What is going on? Overnight the nuns came without their habits, their beautiful Dominican habits. And so it was a rupture, a revolution. And now we have the data showing, the latest data is the millions of people who left the church and never returned as a result of Vatican II. And we're not allowed to question that.
Right.
And we're not in, and many great theologians have gone into the documents in depth. I'm a little more interested in the political machinations and of what happened in Vatican II, and they show me that this was a disaster. This was frankly intentional. The modernists took hold of the agenda at Vatican II, and nobody had Google. Nobody had the ability to understand what was going on. All they knew back then was that this is not right. This is a departure from the faith that we know, the devotion, the piety, the reverence at Mass. And although people couldn't articulate, they knew in their heart that this was something that they didn't want to be a part of. And so, but we can't talk about, that's off topic, right?
Yeah.
The Vatican II.
Well,
And
one of the rotten fruits, if I could just say real quick, is what's happening right now with Leo and his support for the green agenda, right?
yes,
And he's taken this from his predecessors. This is a recent Mass for the Care of Creation that he's promoting. Leo also has been saying other words of praise for the green movement as well. This is when he was on speaking with various retreat goers He says the increasingly grave environmental devastation that is occurring is profoundly challenging people's consciences. There is an urgency to address this by all humanity. So the focus has been shifted, as you clearly mentioned here, from the doctrines and the dogmas to the social justice ideology, to the care of creation masses. It's again the rotten fruits of the council, and I just think it's so blatantly obvious that it comes from it.
Well, they're really a laughing stock because fortunately, thanks to Google and thanks to, the internet and social media, people have now researched climate change and know it's the hoax that it is. It hasn't caught up to the Vatican, but they're never going to accept that because that's the agenda of the UN. It's the agenda of the Paris Climate Treaty. It's and the whole purpose of this is depopulation, that man causes climate change. And it is one of many tools that are used by the modernists and globalists to depopulate the world. And so what's deeply troubling to me is that he's continuing this, the new environmental sins that we have with as we are all facing the madness of abortion, the madness of the LGBT agenda, the madness of gender ideology and the mutilation of children, the coarseness of our culture, the lack of God and faith in our culture. Those are the issues that are rocking Christianity in the Western civilization. The salvation of man, which we never hear from the Vatican. So to me, it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's an insult to our intelligence. And I mean, to me, this is why wouldn't anybody in Trad Inc. take one look at this care of creation mass and go, okay, I got it. Well, now we have new language in the mass. Now we have new readings, all to prop up this phony globalist hoax that is really about destroying mankind. I mean, that's what this is all about. So, I mean, so he continues to take everything that Bergoglio did and keep moving it forward.
Yeah. And here I'm bringing up on the screen for our viewers, this is a statement issued by Archbishop Vigano about the Vatican's support for the Agenda 2030. And he says this about Leo. It is therefore dismaying and scandalous to see, after years of Bergoglio's climate obsession, how his successor continues to support the globalist agenda by providing doctrinal foundations for an openly anti-human, anti-Christian, anti-Christic ideology, abusing the prestige and authority of the Catholic Church. So again, we're seeing here pushback. Again, Vigano is only one voice; not many others are pushing back. Here's again the problem with all this. This is a statement that Leo said to those pilgrims over in France. Only an inner conversion makes possible the change of habits and mentality that leads to a new way of living in communion with the environment. I mean, I don't know, when popes in the past always spoke of conversion, they spoke about converting to the Catholic faith, to Jesus Christ, the one true religion, not green ecology and ideology.
Right. I went over to the Vatican in 2015 with some of the world's most brilliant, greatest scientists, and I barely passed biology, so let that be a caveat. And they were protesting. These are men who are PhDs from MIT, and brilliant men. And they were deeply troubled by what was going on in this climate agenda in the Vatican. And they sought to sit down with the Vatican to discuss the other side, because as we know, even Benedict understood that there's two sides to this issue, and part of arriving at truth is to argue and debate the issues. And the Vatican threw them out of the press conference, refused to meet with them, refused to even address any of their concerns. And these are men, some of these men were from NASA, and they were very troubled because what they saw as scientists, all these years, they believed that the Catholic Church was always pursuing the truth. And once Francis arrived with his climate agenda, they were shocked and they couldn't believe the frauds that the Vatican was relying on as their experts. Similarly, remember the Vatican Health Conference where Francis had, let me see, he had Cindy Crawford and Chelsea Clinton and Anthony Fauci to discuss the mandate of the vax. I mean, it's so troubling. And
Yeah.
if it's only going to be the laity that call out this hypocrisy and stupidity, because if a priest or bishop dares to do so, well, you saw what happened to Vigano, you saw what happens every day to canceled priests, and so it's up to the laity to call them out. And there's going to be, I mean, I think every week we'll have more and more of this with Pope Leo.
I do want to continue that focus, especially on China. I know
Yeah.
you have some things to share about China, but I do want to make a bit of a momentary pit stop here, because one area that the Vatican seems to think it does have an edge at the moment, or at least seems to be building up right now, is the youth wing of Catholic Inc. Okay, and they just had this in the Vatican just a couple of days ago. Again, from Vatican News here, Catholic digital missionaries and influencers share hope at Jubilee event. We saw a number of young people, Zoomers, young millennials. I'm bringing up on the screen now.
Mhm.
One of them, Michael Lofton, who boasted about his time there. And these are young Catholics who, it seems to me, are being groomed by the Vatican to go out there to be the youth wing of Leo's regime and to, among other things, push what we're talking about here, the green ideology, but also just everything else that he's doing. And it seems to me to be sort of a sinister strategy where you're roping in the liberal young people who have never been around to really see the stuff that we lived through before, and they think, oh, this guy's very conservative, he's got nice vestments on, and then you rope in the semi-trads, those who are part of Trad Inc., and then you've controlled basically the entire messaging apparatus of the Vatican, and you're pushing folks like you and I out. I mean, do you see
Yeah.
that as the sort of plan here with this youth event
Yeah,
gathering?
imagine the Vatican exploiting and grooming young people. Oh, all right, surprise, surprise, right?
Yeah.
Um, and a generation, how many generations have not been catechized, so they don't have the ability to discern with critical eyes what's going on. And obviously they're trying to rope in, the young Catholics into, the social media. Look, Stephen, I think this has been planned. I think this was, well thought out. I think, frankly, because of Bergoglio and his hot temper
Mm-hmm.
and volatile comments, that they realized that they had to pivot the PR move, and this
Yes.
is the PR move. But all the more reason why we need to um, not allow children and young people to be exploited yet again, even ideologically, by the Vatican, who has a modernist agenda. And I saw this time and time again on the sexual front, exploiting children, exploiting families. And to me, this is just another version of it. But the only way to counteract that is to educate yourself about the faith, educate yourself about these ideological um, innovations that the Vatican is embracing, so that young people can come at this with open eyes, with a discerning intellect, and not to have their faith become enveloped by a social justice version that has nothing to do with salvation, nothing to do with their soul. And so, it's we're going to see more of this. We're
Yeah.
going to see more of this. Um, and we have to really be on guard and to counteract it immediately.
Yeah. I think Barron's going to probably be involved with this as it rolls out in the future. I mean, I do see
Mhm.
influencers sort of getting like a Vatican stamp of approval, getting their imprimatur on their Twitter accounts, saying, "Okay, they're acting as a on our behalf" or something. You know, so they're going to continue to deputize Vatican issues to the laity, and this is, I think, going to be the next step in that. And it is very worrying because it's going to brand those voices like us, like yourself, like others who are speaking out as, again, sort of like a soft excommunication, if you will. Like, oh, you can't trust that influencer, you can't trust that outlet. Do you kind of see that maybe as like the nitty gritty as this maybe moves forward into its implementation stages over the next, I imagine, just a couple of years even?
Yeah, I mean, we're called to be martyrs, whether we're white
Yeah,
martyrs or red martyrs, so be it.
yeah,
I think, I think frankly, we're all going to be judged on how we fought for our Holy Mother Church during this crisis time, which is only going to get worse. I mean, I embrace kind of the challenge and embrace this moment in time that God chose all of us to be in. And how much do you love me? His
right,
question to Peter, right? How
right,
much are you willing to suffer the slings and arrows of Jorge Bergoglio and Prevost and the Vatican PR machine?
yeah,
Um, Truth, what young people will realize if they take a deep dive both in prayer and in educating themselves in the faith is that truth is the only shield you need. It's the armor that will protect you from all the slings and arrows. And so bring it on. And I suspect that Trad Inc. will come along at some point
mhm,
because you have Leo have all the pressure of the modernists, the globalists on him to
yeah,
continue to finish out what Bergoglio started. And so he can't backpedal, in my opinion, because he has the wrath of the modernists.
yeah.
And so he's going to march forward smoothly, slowly. But I ask people to really be discerning and to not be bamboozled
Right.
by the soft voice.
I think that's great advice. I think the young people too need to understand. Yeah, Vatican II is the issue. You know, this everything that we're talking about now, the social justice ideology, the green ideology, that's a flowing from from the council. You know, what we
Yes.
see the offshoots of it. So it's downstream from that. But to your point, let's advance the story here. We have seen some new developments since Leo has taken office. Most significantly here, a headline from AP: Leo names first Chinese bishop, signaling he is continuing Vatican's controversial accord. You've been covering this for a very long time. What is your assessment of the continuation of the Bergoglio appeasement of the Chinese?
Well, this was my request at the very beginning that the new pope, whoever he is, on day one should repeal the secret CCP Vatican deal. We know that there are at least 10 elderly Catholic bishops who are rotting in CCP prison because, in many being tortured, because they will not agree to submit to the patriotic church that is the tool of the Chinese Communist Party. One of whom, Bishop Zhu Zijimin, has been in prison since 1997. And this is what we know about Prevost. Apparently, he's been to China many times. He's been read in on China many times. And the moment, Stephen, the ink was dry on this deal, the communists immediately started
I
violating
remember
it
that. Yep.
and appointing bishops who had not been, co-approved by the Vatican, creating dioceses which had not been approved by the Vatican. And this is to maybe something we'll talk about. And in fact, Xi Jinping has ordered all children under the age of 18 barred from any religious ceremonies. This was after the Vatican deal. There's been no comment on that. He has taken down crucifixes in Catholic churches and replaced them with pictures of himself. He has even had the Bible rewritten so that it reflects socialist policies. So is it too much to ask that Leo, the humble missionary, would mention his brother bishops in prison for upholding the Catholic faith, the true Catholic faith,
Yeah.
and refusing to bow down to the murderous Communist Party. You would expect their shepherd to fight for them against this violent regime of Xi Jinping. And to me, he doesn't get a pass on this. He
Right.
does not get a pass. And this, he knows darn well what's going on in China. And he should tell Parolin to pull the deal. And instead, instead, these good holy men are rotting in jail. And one of the things that I can really thank Bergoglio about is I was forced to really study about the Chinese Catholic Church and what Mao Zedong did to the Catholic Church in China during the 1950s, and how many Catholic bishops refused to join the patriotic church because they knew, certainly in the founding and now especially, it's a creation of the CCP. Ultimately, the goal is to crush and eliminate the Catholic Church completely. And by the way, there's another thing that went on with this deal that people should know about. Christian churches point to the Catholic Church's deal with China as the reason why there was an immediate uptick of persecution and destruction of churches, both Christian and Catholic churches in China, because the CCP said, oh, the Vatican agrees with us. The Vatican's a partner with us in this effort. So, I mean, it's just a scandal beyond all scandals. With every single day that pass, Leo becomes more and more complicit in this injustice and abomination.
What has been the latest with Cardinal Zen? I know he was an outspoken critic of the regime before him, Francis regime, and the deal. Has he been speaking out still? Is he even allowed to speak out? What's the latest with him?
The CCP keeps hanging over his head, a violation of the new Hong Kong security law, which they're actually at the moment prosecuting Jimmy Lai for. Jimmy Lai, the Catholic billionaire, Hong Kong close friend of Cardinal Zen. And he is going to probably spend his lifetime in jail on these phony, trumped up charges, which any other pope would be screaming from the rafters and using his bully pulpit about the treatment of Jimmy Lai, about the treatment of these bishops. So Cardinal Zen, initially called this a suicide deal. It was a pact with the devil. It still remains a pact with the devil. He's, I think, 92 or 93 now. He's really getting up there in age. He certainly is, loves the Latin Mass. But he's done, I think, all he can do. Francis didn't listen to him. The conclave didn't listen to him.
Right.
And quite frankly, Stephen, I want to know how many times Prevost went to China. What was the purpose of these trips to China? Who arranged and paid for these trips to China? And did China have to sign off and approve his election as pontiff? China, we know, interfered with the Bergoglio in this deal. So there are a lot of unanswered questions, and it's my shout out and call to investigators, hopefully the young people in the audience who may be curious to ask and look for answers to these questions.
I'm bringing up here on the screen a link to your Twitter account where you have a little 2-minute 54-second video on Jimmy Lai. So go to that if you're interested in learning more about him. Also visit Liz's X account here, x.com/Elizabeth Yore. You were on the Benjamin Harnwell show recently on the Bannon program there. What have you been talking about over there with all of those guys? What's the latest? I know you were covering the the U.S. spying on the bishops.
Yeah, so U.S. spying on the traditional Catholic Church, the FBI weaponizing the Catholic Mass, and what was told to us by Chris Wray as a one-time rogue agent that was going after the traditional Catholic Church has now turned out to be a nationwide investigation, weaponization of Catholics, not only traditional Catholics, but other Catholics. A priest and choir director were interviewed by the FBI. The priest wisely asked to speak to his attorney. And as a result of that, the FBI watched his phone, seized his.
I think it was SSPX priest too.
Yes, it was.
Oh, yeah.
SSPX seized his
Not
bank
not
records.
immune from
Yeah. Oh no.
surveillance. Yeah.
No. Seized his
Mhm,
bank records.
mhm.
And as I said yesterday in the war room, he was lucky they didn't plant child porn on his computer. This is
Right,
serious. This is serious. And just because Kash Patel or Trump is in office
right.
does not mean that we should ignore this. I'm very troubled, and I'm also curious as to what really drove this. This was shortly after Traditionis Custodes, the suppression of the Latin Mass.
Mhm.
And was there any involvement by the Vatican or the Catholic bishops in the United States in this investigation?
That's a big question. I think that deserves an answer because,
Yes.
I mean, as we've already made point clear that the traditional Catholics in the U.S. are the biggest critics, or they were of the Vatican under Francis, and now, did they partner with them to kind of root out those who they saw was undesirable? And I think that's something we need the facts on. And I think too, I mean, has the Vatican responded? Have any bishops responded
No.
to this spying going on in this new report that just came out, by the way?
No. The new report, I would really encourage everybody to read it. It's from Jim Jordan. It's an interim report. There's far more information in this about Chris Wade just kind of dismissed it like it was, just a nothing burger. In fact, this was a coordinated effort throughout, I think, over 100 and some FBI offices. The fact that they're attending mass and spying on people and intimidating priests, this is, I think, just the beginning. This is Stasi-like behavior and conduct. Yes, thank you. That's the Judiciary Committee report. Read it. We need to really slam the FBI with more FOIAs. Talk to your congressman to demand more issues. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg myself.
Yes.
I think this was far more widespread. And if you can intimidate the vocal traditional Catholic world who is against abortion, against the destruction of the nuclear family, against LGBT, against gender ideology, then the globalists, the modernists, the atheists have won. So they smartly targeted the one group of people that are strong in the faith and tough as nails. So let's continue that battle because it can reassert itself very quickly.
Right. Liz, I'm going to bring up your Twitter account here for people again to see that. What else can you tell us about what you've been up to lately? Where can we find the rest of your work other than what we've already talked about here?
Your Children, I have a Substack that I'm starting to write. I'm going to be posting, I think probably this weekend, an in-depth article about the, now we know, 450,000 unaccompanied minor children that have gone missing and are not able to be identified. Through my work in child advocacy with missing children, I know the threat and danger these kids are in. It is absolutely a catastrophic crisis. We're not going to be able to find all these kids. And sadly, many of these children were dropped into homes of people's total strangers, and it was done by Catholic charities who were paid billions of dollars to facilitate really what I consider the criminal behavior of the Biden administration that is really jeopardizing children. When you think of cities of 500,000 people, I mean, can you imagine 500,000 people are missing from the city of Cincinnati or I mean, there would be outrage. So we need the public's eyes and ears on this. So that's my next challenge. I'll be posting that soon.
Wonderful. Well, we're always praying for you, and we
Thank
consider it
you.
an honor that you're an ally of ours for a long time here. Do you have anything else to say to our viewers today, and before we sign off?
No, I mean, I guess my only thought, and especially since we've been talking about, kind of the silence of Trad Inc., I want to remind people of what St. Catherine of Siena said. We've had enough exhortations to be silent. Cry out with 1,000 tongues. I see the world is rotten because of silence. So that's my final word to people, to take the brave Catherine of Siena to heart, and to speak out, and to love and purify Holy Mother Church.
Yeah, I think too the verse that comes to mind when you say that is, if these are silent, the stones will cry out. There's a lot
Yeah.
of stones that are going to cry out because God's not going to be stopped in telling the truth,
No.
and He's going to work through all of us. Hopefully, if we're, again, we have to pray, be humble, and pray that He will use us as His vessels, and to continue to expose the crimes and the corruption and speak for truth. So, thank you for being one of those stones, Liz. And
Well, thank you. And Christ is using you, Stephen, to cry out. So thank you. It's great to see you in this space.
likewise, wonderful. And thank you, Liz, and thank you for everybody for watching today. God bless. Have a great week, and talk to you next time. Thank you.